What's going on, guys? Today we're talking about rebuilding DM and PM solenoids. So in this shooting video I had everything put together. I had taken the gun and chronoed it inside, and I had taken it out to shoot it. So let's see what happens. We are... Where's my chrono? Should be 280s. 260, 272. So this kind of took me by surprise. I made sure the eyes were working, made sure the gun was still on, made sure the loader was still working, cycled it a couple times, still having issues. So at this point, the only thing you can really do is get into the solenoid, clean it up, make sure you're not rolling any O-rings or anything like that. So today we're going to completely disassemble and get into...
Oh boy. What's going on, guys? We've got a PM6 here.
So I'm going to be doing a voiceover over the video,
and then,
so I can give it a little bit more explanation during some parts of it. Then, so let's get into it.
Took it outside in the cold and it just froze up. So
as you saw in the clip, we were out in the cold. The gun kind of just froze up. It was working okay inside because I was able to chrono it.
So we're gonna do some.
My suspicion after doing all the other checks is that it's the solenoid. So we're gonna get into it. So this is applicable for what, the PM? Excuse me, the PM6. 7 and 8, and the DM, I'll have to look it up and I'll put it on the screen. Actually, it'll be in the title of the show. So we're going to move the 2 frame screws. Massive drop in the way.
First things first, if you ever have a solenoid issue where the solenoid is not clicking on a DM or PM series, test a new battery first.
The first thing you're going to want to do before you even start this is try a new battery.
So we've separated our frame.
There's no point in getting into this until you do that.
So we can undo the grips.
You're going to want to next move on to your body to frame connection. There's going to be an eye wire or eye ribbon, and then a 2-pronged solenoid connection.
For this one, but it needs to be done. So we'll make a video.
So remove the grips, find those where they are.
Disconnect your eye ribbon and your...
If you do have an eye ribbon, you need to be very careful. Those crimp easy. If you bend it too much, it can break the actual connector in the plastic. It just separates it, or it bends too far. So these PMs on the board have a little slider.
You can actually check the pins, make sure they're not bent,
and then disconnect your solenoid.
This eye section here, it's got these 2 tabs. Let's slide up, and then the ribbon can come out. So our frame is off.
So we have successfully separated the frame and the body. We can now take a peek at the solenoid. So this has 2 screws holding it in.
So it's got these tiny,
a very small Phillips head screw.
1 and 2.
They both need to be removed. When you're removing them, you don't need to be careful about order.
That screwdriver is too big. Jeweler's screwdrivers. Measured. A little bit differently than standard screwdrivers. Careful of the ribbon, it's very damageable.
You're just going to pry it up out of there. After the screws are removed, there's nothing else holding it on. So we're going to make sure our gasket is not sitting in the body. And we're going to inspect the gasket. We're going to inspect the seating surface. We're going to take a peek up into the spool before we take it apart, see if there's anything obvious. We're also going to remove the gasket just so we don't damage it. You will, if you're getting to this point, you will more than likely be disassembling it all the way. So having the gasket on there while you're turning your Allens or your Phillips screwdriver just is one step where it might get damaged.
It's also good to remove it so you can clean everything. So we've got the two sections of this.
So there's two sections here. You have the gray spool section, you have a manifold, and then you have the pilot where the wire is connected.
You're going to remove these screws.
There are 4 screws to get to the solenoid spool. One is covered, so you need to remove the pilot screws. That will expose the last one.
From our bigger screw, or excuse me, the main hold down screws. So, pilot section.
Here's your pilot section. Another gasket for your manifold section.
And then we have to get this manifold section off. This screw is covered up by the pilot, and so the pilot needs to be removed. These screws are going to go all the way into the spool housing.
You're going to be
Another gasket, careful, and then our orientation.
You're going to want to be cautious of the orientation of the manifold.
On the top is a pin.
The top, there's a pin. On the bottom, there's a gasket. So I'm setting it up so if I was looking at the solenoid attached to the body, that's how I'm setting it on my work mat, so it goes back together that same way.
On there. That can be good. That can be bad. We'll see.
So there's a spring at the end of this, and sometimes you can force it in and out, and it'll pop out enough to grab the end of the spool. Looks like in this case we're going to need to nudge the spool out far enough. You need to be really careful
don't want to hit any of the seals.
Not to hit the seals on the solenoid.
So one trick, you can manually operate the solenoid, and that will help you see where the gaskets are. So in this one I'm going to push in this slot, pushing that way, on the face of that spool there.
There's no gasket right there.
So as you slowly remove the spool from the solenoid, you're going to notice that there's a spring in the end. That spring is going to go back into the bottom end of the spool housing. There's some split rings on here. The orange O-rings, you'll notice they have a little crack in them. And then you're going to want to take a good look at all the other O-rings. Currently, Dye sells the spool housing and the pilot separately. So that's really nice that they're supporting these older platforms. You're going to wipe off all the old grease. You're going to want to check to see if there are any damaged O-rings that are some obvious cause of it being hung up.
Okay, this is a little concerning here. I've got some...
On this one there's actually some tarnish, some abnormal wear on the spool. So I'm guessing there's some debris inside the housing that we're going to clean out.
So that's interesting for sure.
We pull out our
Going to get some Q-tips.
lint-free Q-tips.
Lint-free Q-tips. Clean in here the best we can.
Give that a good clean.
Clean out our gasket surface.
and a quick little spray with our compressor. Dry it off, clean it out.
And then we'll reassemble.
At this point, you're just going to get back into reassembly.
So in my experience, you're not going to want to use anything other than Dow 33 for solenoids.
What I'm talking about here is Dow 33 is the go-to for this application.
The thicker, thin
You're not going to want any. You're not going to want to use anything thicker like Lurker Lube or anything thinned out like the old Marmalade, or I can't remember which one that was, or any other aftermarkets. Please don't use Ultra Silk or anything like that. Dow 33 and a very light coating at that.
Just want these to be wet.
O-rings just need to be wet. Just need to get it into position and then have some lubricant on it.
Not excessive. Okay. Under we have our spring side. The whole spring goes back.
Notice I have found our spring side, and the spring is going to go back in the hole, and that spring is going to go in first.
And you are going to ever so gently, as
This is a very important part. The spool needs to be very delicately lined up with the housing,
as to make the spring not
and you also don't want the spring to fall out. So you kind of got to go up at an angle.
You gotta
And
kinda pass each of these O-ring interfaces.
as each O-ring goes through, there's going to be a little
Each one of those.
bump as it slides in. Being careful not to catch it on any of the sides of the
Make those
housing.
little portions.
Next, we're going to
So,
put the manifold back on,
Spool back in.
and then the
We're gonna
pilot
put our
back on. I'm not
manifold back
exactly
in.
sure what the
Just
term
kinda
for this
there
piece
with
is,
that
but
piece.
part of the pilot.
Whatever's left on my finger.
You want to pay attention to the orientation that we had when we took it off, and very lightly lubricate that O-ring in there again. These plastic parts, especially from 2006, are getting very old and very brittle. I've seen several of these where the housing is cracked and it's still working, but it's just asking for a leak. So as you screw these in,
And you're not
be
cranking these
extra
down.
careful
I've
not to crank
seen
these down and crack the
2 or 3 solenoids with cracked housings, because people are trying to fix
edges of these plastic pieces that are
cranking
getting
down these
extremely old.
plastic fittings that are old.
Just gonna wipe a touch of lube on there,
One way for this one to go.
and then the pilot portion goes back on.
TM6, so 2005, 2006 means that it is coming up on 10 years old. Oh, well, not really. What? Excuse me. Not 10 years. 17 years old.
So at this point, we're going to
So we're gonna
put
get
our gasket back in.
Gasket. Put that back in.
Gently press it into place.
Again.
We're then going to lightly apply a coat of lubricant to the gasket. If you apply so much lube that you're pushing it into the channels towards the solenoid spool, that is bad. These are air paths, not paths for Dow 33 to go through your gun.
Stand. Well, we can do it with the stand. You can see.
I'm gonna whip out my stand here.
Third hand. It's great.
I just said
So be careful
it's like a third hand, it's great.
The lube should keep it in place, but keep an eye on it.
So the lube can hold the gasket in place, but sometimes it can drop off. So as you're putting the solenoid back on, be careful that up until that last moment you have, that the gasket is still attached to the solenoid. So you don't tighten it over and put a nasty line through the gasket.
Again, when you're tightening these,
Little crimp line.
the body,
So we're going to tighten these
do
screws
not overdo
back and forth on the screws, even pressure, not excessively tight.
Going tighter
If
is
you
not
strip
going to
out
fix it.
the
You
screw
have
hole,
a bad gasket.
it's going to be very difficult to
It
fix.
temporarily could for sure, but then you also run the risk of stripping out the holes in your body. That's worse. You also want to make sure you have even pressure between those two. So let's hook this up and we'll see if we got lucky.
So we're going to do a little test here. Make sure, or see if what we did anything.
Okay,
And luckily,
so that's great.
this
news.
one has been resurrected. There's two things you can do. It looks like Dye. Oh, so Dye used to sell these
Fire right
regulators. Excuse me. Dye used to sell these solenoids, and you could get them on places like ANSgear.com.
So while we've got
Recently,
that
I
going,
have
we can
seen
quick
that they now just sell the pilot section,
we'll
and they
put the fire
now
ribbon back on.
individually sell the spool section. So it looks like a new product. I believe there was Dye Labs packaging, which is really exciting. Just from a consumer perspective, that Dye continues to support their markers
There's
in a
cycle
legacy
right there.
fashion.
The ribbon is going to be facing up.
Big points in my book. So
See anything.
if you still at this point have no clicking, I would recommend checking out the pilot section and getting a new pilot.
Small pair of needle nose.
If you start clicking and you're still getting leaks, you could try a new gasket, or you could
then
get that whole spool section now. So assembly is going to be a little bit different for each of your guns. They each need an eye wire or an eye ribbon hooked up to the board, and they each need their solenoid plugged back in. Paying close attention to when you finally connect the frame and the body
PM6
to
frame is
not
nice.
crimp
It's got
the eye
this
wires.
Huge cutout for your wires.
The PM6 here is nice because it's got the huge cutout in the frame where you can have all the space in the world to make sure you don't pinch anything. This is not an ultralight frame, and it shows.
And your eye ribbon. And then we're going to put the frame screws back on.
Obviously, this is going to be dependent for how you're going to set up with the ASA and regulator, but those are going to be put back on, and you're pretty much done. Just finish reassembly the way you took it apart. So if you're having any questions with this or any troubles, feel free to reach out to me. If you don't want to do it, you can send your marker into me, and I can do this for you. Please, if this video is helpful, like the video and subscribe for more cool paintball tech stuff, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.
On my frame screws. There it is. We're not going to tighten these all the way, especially because I was just looking for my frame screw, but we're going to get the threads going. Then we're going to verify one more time. That our wires are not pinched and our ribbon is not kinked. Then we can tighten it down. And that is that. Appreciate you guys watching. If you learned anything, or if this was any help at all, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Got lots of cool tech videos. That's what I really like doing. If you have any requests, absolutely shoot me a message on Instagram. or leave a comment on video. You know, you can also tag people in YouTube now. You're using handles and all that jazz. So you could like tag me in a video. Ask me what's going on. So that's it. I'm hoping, well, let's verify our eyes are working. Beautiful. Oh, that's good. That's good sound. Getting some text messages. Okay. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Appreciate it.